is a really good option for a lot of white players that want to avoid the classic Sicilian lines, because most Sicilian players don't really know how to play all that well. It seems like against close Sicilian, they're not as used to seeing it. It's played more at the higher levels actually, so I run into it a lot in tournaments, and it's a really solid opening. Instead of having that exchange on d4 of pawns that opens a position up and leads to all these variations that we've been learning in the course, it keeps the position closed, and it's a more slow positional game that you're going to have, more like a normal game of chess instead of like a big attack happening from white or black, and all the tactics and sometimes chaos that can ensue in the Sicilian. So basically in the closed Sicilian, white opts to play knight to c3 here in this second move. And basically they're going to set their position up like a king's Indian attack for white, where they're going to fianchetto their king's bishop, and they're going to look to play f4 at some point and expand on the king side and attack the king. So white is still going to look to get a good attack on the king side, and black is going to look to expand on the queen side, but it's going to be a very different type of position. And so if you know how to play it for black, you can pretty much get equality pretty easy. And white is willing to give you that because they don't want to have the really sharp lines that can happen in Sicilian, where black is really well versed. They can get a nice counterattack or have a really complex, chaotic position where a lot of tactics can happen. Black wants something a little bit, or white wants something a little more tame. Maybe they want to surprise their opponent, right? As I've been saying, a lot of times you want to play something that you think your opponent won't know very well, because it's easy for them to make a mistake. It's easy for you to get a good position. And again, if you're playing blitz, it'll save you time on the clock as well, while you're basically making grandmaster strength moves. So we'll follow up in this case with knight to c6 usually, and they will immediately fianchetto their bishop. Instead of playing d4 and trading the pawn, they'll just leave that pawn there, and they'll basically ignore it. This pawn right here is what I'm talking about, right? That's normally the one that we get traded off. They'll ignore that, they'll leave it there, and we will also fianchetto our bishop. Since we're aiming on the queen side, it makes sense for us to do this, and white is going into a King's Indian type of attack position in this case. So they'll put the knight on e2. We will develop normally. Both sides will castle. Notice it's a lot more slow. There's no immediately crushing pawn storm coming, and it's going to be much more strategic struggle. And then we might want to do something like d6. It depends on what you want to play. They will maybe play f4 immediately. This does allow us to play what seems to be kind of an annoying move, bishop to g4, and put a pin on this knight, but it doesn't really do anything because white can simply make it go back. We can't, in this case, put it on h5 because then it will be blocked and we will lose a piece. So we would just have to retreat it. We get them to play h3, which slightly weakens their king side a little bit, but it's not really worth doing. So if you're playing this for white and you're worried about that move there, it's no problem. All you have to do is move this down. And if they trade off the knight, well, they just traded off one of their good pieces, a good bishop, for a knight for no reason. So it wouldn't benefit them. So it's just an example there. Usually the queen will reroute itself over to f2, or if you're going to play g3 or g3 to g4 here, the queen may also end up on g3, which is a really good square. So white is going to usually get a pretty good attack if they know what they're doing, but we're going to be pushing on the queen side too. One way to do that, as we saw in the Chinese dragon, is to move the rook over and play b4. This is a really good theme in lots of different Sicilian defense scenarios for black. So it's just another good thing to know. Move the rook over and push this pawn forward. So this is a typical situation we have. It kind of looks like a dragon, only instead of having the white king on the opposite side and a pawn storm coming, you have it more like a King's Indian attack where the king's on the same side as yours and the pawn storm is coming from that side. And so we're going to either try to defend it or simply ignore it for now and try to soften up their queen side and expand over here and gain some sort of strategic advantage. And it's worth noting that oftentimes it is not a good idea to move your pawns on the same side as your king and attack with pawns in front of your king. But we saw it with the Kara's attack, and now we're seeing it here in the close Sicilian. And the reason it's okay in some scenarios is based on a couple different factors. If the center is closed, as in this case it is right now, although it could easily be opened up, we see in the King's Indian defense, which we don't cover in this course, obviously, a lot of times you'll have the pawn chain will be locked up because it'll be closed, and then you can oftentimes either just leave your king in the center, or you can castle and attack from the king side because if there's not an opening of the center, then your king is usually safe. In this case, the key factor is that your bishop is controlling this dark square diagonal, and so there's no way to like make a check on the king or to easily attack the king. We could also just move the king over as white over here, and then move our rook over, and it's not in any danger. Okay, so if the center's closed, it's not in any danger, and usually if the bishop is on the same diagonal as your king, oftentimes you can advance this f pawn and attack this way, especially if your opponent is fianchettoed. As we saw in the dragon, the fianchettoed position is a little bit more vulnerable to an attack because of this pawn being up here, and because if the opponent can successfully trade off your dark squared bishop, then your king side is a little bit weaker than it otherwise would be. But we still choose to do it because when having a fianchettoed position, we have a really good, powerful piece in this bishop usually, and a lot of openings call for fianchettoed bishop, so it makes it so that we can be familiar with all different kinds of chess positions, chess openings, where you fianchetto the bishop. So it's just a good thing to have as part of your repertoire, and it's generally an aggressive setup. It's something that you're going to be looking to attack with when you have a fianchettoed bishop. So not fianchettoing is more defensive, and you have a slightly safer king, but it's more passive. And fianchetting the bishop is slightly more aggressive. You have a slightly less safe king, but you're looking to attack. That's kind of the general attitude that you're having in the game. Okay, so we played b5 here. The knight can't really do anything. We're going to look to expand over here and maybe gain something. Notice that our bishop is aimed over here at the rook, at the queen side. Our rook is also aimed there now. We can bring our queen over. So black has a lot of good chances here, as does white. White might just move the queen over. The queen now has a battery with this bishop and with this rook. They're going to look to, at some point, either play f5 or first play g4 and then f5. In the meantime, we're not going to try to defend against that. We want to develop our own threats and our own pieces. So one thing we can do is we can bring our queen over here and make it so if this rook moves or this knight moves, we can make the knight move by playing b4 next. Then there are opportunities for us to win a pawn and to gain some advantage over here. So at this point, you need to do a lot of calculation. We can maybe blitz out a lot of these first moves because we know the opening, and depending on what your opponent does, you're going to be doing a lot of thinking. Your opponent may even want to reroute this knight all the way over here. If your opponent is really good, they're not going to attack immediately. They're going to take some time to move their pieces around so that when they do finally make an attack, it's a successful one. In the meantime, we can look to push forward and gain some sort of an advantage ourselves. Maybe we want to move this rook over and look to push this forward. Maybe they're going to move their queen forward. You can even maybe sacrifice a pawn in order to surprise your opponent. Lots of different things you can try to do and have a good game. Aim at this weak pawn. Now you have this. Reroute your knight. So you have a really interesting and fun game. It's going to be a lot different than a lot of the other openings that we've seen. So you're going to want to know what to do against it. If you see this as black, just fianchetto your bishop and play almost like play a dragon sort of setup and look for queenside expansion. If you are playing white and you are tired of playing against the same old dragon or Najdorf or Scheveningen for whatever reason, or maybe you like closed positions better, or maybe you like the King's Indian defense or King's Indian attack fianchettoed bishop positions, then this is a really good opening for white to play against the Sicilian, because oftentimes black won't know how to play against it very well, and they won't set up themselves the way that I'm showing you, which combats it quite nicely, because they're getting this expansion on the king side, we're getting this expansion on the queen side. If black misplays this position, for example, let's look at a way that black could misplay this position. He says, oh, I'm just going to play a normal Sicilian. So instead of fianchettoing, maybe he just does something like this. He's used to white playing this d4 move all the time. So when he doesn't see it, he might get kind of confused and just sort of set his position up normally Maybe he's going to go for a Scheveningen sort of setup. And meanwhile, we get all of our stuff ready. He hasn't fianchetted the bishop, and now we can play f4. And he's still going to have some, he can still play the same setup as he did before and look to push on the side, but the big difference is now he doesn't have a fianchetto bishop aiming at the queen side. So his expansion on the queen side is going to be somewhat less effective than it was before. And since this Scheveningen setup is closed, White can easily take the time to rearrange his pieces and maybe get a really dangerous sort of attack, or he can even just strike the center immediately, because now he's got a lot of pieces aimed at the king. And so even if we want to sacrifice a pawn or something, now we can maybe get some dangerous attacking chances depending on how we want to play it. Okay, so it's a really fun opening to play for white. You can surprise your opponent in a lot of different ways, and I encourage you definitely to have it as your repertoire, even if you only know what to do against it for black. The best idea is to fianchetto your bishop and play for queenside pressure.